I'll pay for all the flowers in your basket.
Thank you, sir.
Everyone ignored the flower girl standing beneath the freezing London rain, everyone except Duke William Ashbourne. He bought every flower in her basket and told her to go home. The next morning, all his money was returned with a note. "You paid for my flowers. Not my life." William hurried back to the square carrying one white rose. But Eleanor had disappeared. Everyone in the London square ignored the flower girl standing alone beneath the freezing rain. Everyone except Duke William Ashbourne. He stepped out of his carriage, walked toward her, and bought every flower in her basket. When Eleanor tried to return the extra money, William simply said, "Go home before the rain gets worse." He left without asking her name. But that evening, William discovered one white rose was missing from the flowers he had purchased. The next morning, an envelope arrived at Ashbourne Hall. Inside was all his money and a single note. "You paid for my flowers. Not my life." William returned to the square immediately, but Eleanor had disappeared. Only a few hours earlier, Duke William Ashbourne had been seated inside Parliament, listening to wealthy men debate poverty as though it were a distant country none of them had ever visited. By the time his carriage entered Covent Garden, the winter sky had darkened and rain struck the windows in sharp, restless streams. William sat alone, one gloved hand resting on a stack of documents, while his thoughts remained fixed on the arguments he had heard all afternoon. The poor needed discipline, one lord had declared. Another insisted that suffering encouraged industry. William had said little. He rarely spoke unless words could change something, and that afternoon he had known they would not. Then his carriage slowed. Through the rain-covered glass, William saw a young woman standing beside a small wooden flower cart. Her dark cloak was too thin for the cold, and water dripped from the edge of her bonnet onto her pale cheeks. Nearly every flower remained unsold. Men with warm coats passed without looking at her. Ladies raised their skirts to avoid the puddles and turned their faces away. Still, whenever someone approached, the young woman straightened and smiled. "Fresh roses, madam?" The lady ignored her. "Winter violets, sir? They were cut this morning." The gentleman walked on. Her smile remained until each person had passed. Only then did it fade, revealing exhaustion she clearly did not wish anyone to see. "Stop the carriage," William said. His coachman glanced back in surprise. "Here, Your Grace." William had already opened the door. The rain struck his shoulders the moment he stepped down. Several people recognized him immediately. Conversations softened. Hats were removed. Heads bowed. William noticed none of it. He approached the flower cart. The young woman looked up at him, startled, but she did not curtsy deeply or begin praising his title. She simply gathered herself and spoke as she would to any customer. "Good afternoon. Would you care for a rose?" William looked over the flowers. Some had begun to bend beneath the rain, but the arrangement was careful, and every stem had been cleaned and tied by hand. "How much for all of them?" Her expression changed. "All of them?" "Yes. There are more than 40 flowers here. I can see that." For the first time, suspicion entered her eyes. She studied his expensive coat, the Ashbourne crest on the carriage behind him, and the silent crowd beginning to notice their conversation. "I would be grateful for your business, Your Grace," she said carefully, "but you need not purchase flowers you do not want." William was unaccustomed to having his intentions questioned. "I would not have asked the price if I did not want them." She hesitated before naming the amount. William removed several notes from his wallet and placed them on the cart. It was far more than she had requested. Her eyes widened. "Your Grace, this is too much." "Then keep what I owe you." He lifted the wooden box containing the flowers and turned toward his carriage. The young woman quickly counted the notes. A moment later, her footsteps splashed through the water behind him. "Your Grace, wait." William stopped. She stood before him, rain running down her face, holding out the extra money. "I cannot accept this. You have been standing here for hours. That does not change the price. You are cold. That does not make the flowers more valuable." There was no anger in her voice, only quiet determination. William looked at her hand. Her fingers were trembling, though whether from cold or pride he could not tell. Most people accepted whatever he offered. Some thanked him too eagerly. Others lowered their eyes, behaving as though his generosity had bought their gratitude. This woman did neither. "Keep only what the flowers cost," William said. She continued holding out the remaining notes. "And the rest?" William glanced at the darkening sky. Go home before the rain gets worse. For one brief moment, something shifted in her expression. Not gratitude. Not relief. Pain. Before he could understand it, she placed the extra money on top of the flower box. I sell flowers, Your Grace, she said softly. I do not sell reasons for strangers to feel generous. William stared at her. She seemed to realize she had spoken too boldly, but she did not apologize. She lowered her hand and stepped back. William entered the carriage without another word. As it pulled away, he looked through the rear window. The flower cart stood empty beneath the rain. The young woman remained beside it, watching the carriage disappear. She should have looked relieved. Instead, she looked as though he had taken something from her. At Ashbourne Hall, the servants carried the flowers into the blue drawing room. William had no use for so many, but he instructed the housekeeper to place them throughout the estate. Roses appeared in the entrance hall. Violets were arranged in the library. White lilies were set beside the portrait of William's late mother. Only after dinner did William notice the small wooden box resting on his desk. One flower appeared to be missing. He counted the empty spaces between the damp ribbons. The girl had packed the flowers carefully, leaving clear marks where each stem had rested. There should have been one more white rose. William told himself it did not matter. Perhaps it had fallen into the street. Perhaps she had removed it before naming the price. Perhaps he had simply counted incorrectly. Still, he found himself thinking about it long after the servants had gone to bed. The following morning, his butler entered the breakfast room carrying a plain envelope. This was delivered for you, Your Grace. From whom? William opened the envelope. Inside was every note he had given the flower seller, including the exact amount she had earned. Nothing had been kept. Beneath the money lay a small piece of paper. The handwriting was neat and firm. You paid for my flowers. Not my life. William read the sentence twice. Then a third time. He should have been offended. No one spoke to the Duke of Ashbourne with such bluntness. No one rejected his help and returned every penny as though his wealth meant nothing. But anger never came. Instead, he remembered the way she had stood beneath the rain, smiling at people who refused to see her. He remembered the tremble in her hand and the pain that had crossed her face when he told her to go home. William had believed he was giving her an evening of rest. Perhaps she had believed he was purchasing the right to decide what she needed. He folded the note and placed it inside his coat. Less than an hour later, the Ashbourne carriage returned to the square. William stepped down carrying the missing white rose, which one of the servants had found hidden beneath the other flowers. He intended to return it. He also intended to ask the young woman her name. But the flower cart was gone. The corner where she had stood was empty, washed clean by the night's rain. William questioned a nearby fruit seller, then a woman selling ribbons. Both avoided his gaze. Finally, he turned to an elderly bread vendor who had been watching him in silence. The flower seller, William said. Where is she? The old man's expression tightened. You are too late, Your Grace. William looked at the white rose in his hand. Too late for what? The man glanced toward the street as though afraid someone might hear him. But before he could answer, a constable appeared at the far end of the square. The bread vendor lowered his voice. You should not have come back. Then he turned away, leaving William alone beneath the grey winter sky, holding the only flower Eleanor Carter had not been able to sell. The bread vendor waited until the constable had passed before turning back to William. The flower girl was arrested yesterday. For the first time that morning, William forgot the cold. On what charge? Using counterfeit money. William looked at the white rose in his hand, then at the empty corner where Eleanor's cart had stood. That is impossible. The old man gave a bitter smile. Impossible things become believable when a poor woman is accused by a gentleman. He explained that Eleanor had entered a nearby shop after leaving the square. She had tried to buy medicine for her mother with one of the notes she had received that afternoon. Lord Pembroke, a minor nobleman known throughout the market for his gambling debts and violent temper, had been inside. The shopkeeper claimed the note was false. Pembroke immediately accused Eleanor of passing counterfeit money. He insisted he had seen her offering suspicious notes to other merchants, though no one else could confirm it. The constables had taken her before she could defend herself. Why did no one speak for her? William asked. The bread vendor glanced at the surrounding stalls. Because Lord Pembroke has friends. And she has none. She has people who care for her. That is not the same as having power. William felt the truth of those words more sharply than he wished to admit. He turned toward his carriage. Which station? The vendor gave him the address. Less than 20 minutes later, William entered the local magistrate's office with rain still clinging to his coat. The room fell silent the moment his name was announced. A clerk hurried forward. Your Grace, we were not informed that you had business here. You were not meant to be informed. William placed the white rose on the clerk's desk. I am looking for Eleanor Carter. The clerk's expression changed. The flower seller. You know another Eleanor Carter being held without evidence. The man swallowed. She is not being held without evidence, Your Grace. Lord Pembroke provided a statement is not proof. The note she used was counterfeit. Where is it? The clerk hesitated. William's voice grew colder. Bring it to me. Several minutes later, a constable returned with a folded banknote sealed inside a small evidence envelope. William examined it briefly before looking at the clerk. This note is genuine. The clerk blinked. Your Grace, it came from my wallet. No one spoke. William continued. I purchased flowers from Miss Carter yesterday. Every note in her possession came directly from me. Unless you intend to accuse the Duke of Ashbourne of producing counterfeit currency, you will release her immediately. The magistrate was summoned. Apologies followed, then excuses. Lord Pembroke had appeared trustworthy. The shopkeeper had seemed certain. The constables had merely followed procedure. William listened without expression. By the time Eleanor was brought from the holding room, every man in the office understood that the Duke would remember their names. She looked smaller than she had in the square. Her cloak was still damp from the previous day, and a bruise darkened one wrist where the constable had gripped her. Yet her back remained straight, and when she saw William, she did not rush toward him. Instead, she stopped. What are you doing here? The question caught him off guard. I came to take you home. I can walk. You spent the night in a cell. I am aware of where I spent it. William glanced at the bruise on her wrist. Something cold settled inside him. Who did that? Eleanor pulled her sleeve down. It does not matter. It matters to me. That is precisely the problem. The clerk lowered his head, pretending not to hear. William led Eleanor outside where his carriage waited. She refused to enter until he assured her he would not take her anywhere she had not chosen. Only then did she give him the address of a narrow house near 7 Dials. They sat opposite each other in silence. William had expected relief, perhaps even gratitude. Instead, Eleanor watched the passing streets with an expression he could not read. At last, he said, Lord Pembroke's accusation was false. I knew that. The magistrate has dismissed the charge. I heard him. Then why do you look as though I have done something wrong? Eleanor turned toward him. Because you believe rescuing me has repaired what happened. William frowned. You would still be imprisoned if I had not come. Yes. Her answer was calm, but it carried no submission. And I am grateful that you spoke the truth, but I should not have needed a duke to prove that I was innocent. William had no reply. Eleanor continued, no one asked where the money came from. No one examined it properly. A nobleman accused me, so they decided I must be guilty. I cannot change what they did yesterday. No. But your presence will change what they say tomorrow. The carriage stopped before a modest brick house. Eleanor reached for the door. Please do not come looking for me again. William stared at her. I have no intention of causing you harm. I know. Then why ask me to stay away? Because men like you are allowed to be kind without consequence. Her hand rested on the carriage door. Women like me are not allowed to receive that kindness without being judged for it. Before William could answer, she stepped onto the street. He watched her enter the house without looking back. For the next several days, William respected her request, though he thought of her more often than he wished to admit. Then the rumors reached Ashbourne Hall. At first, they appeared in whispers between guests. A duke had stopped his carriage for a flower seller. He had purchased everything she owned. The following morning, he had stormed into a magistrate's office and demanded her release. By the end of the week, the story had changed entirely. Eleanor was no longer an innocent woman falsely accused. She had become a calculating girl who had attracted the attention of a wealthy nobleman. Some claimed William had paid for a private arrangement. Others said she had staged the arrest so he could rescue her. Lord Pembroke encouraged every version. William learned the extent of the damage when his housekeeper quietly informed him that merchants had begun refusing Eleanor's flowers. "She has lost nearly half her customers," Mrs. Whitmore said. "Some ladies will not approach her stall now." William stood beside the library window, his hands clasped behind his back. "And the rest? They come only to stare." The thought of Eleanor standing beneath their curious eyes disturbed him more than open cruelty would have. He could confront Lord Pembroke. He could publish a statement. He could force the shopkeeper to confess that the accusation had been careless. But every public defense would connect Eleanor's name more firmly to his own. The more loudly the Duke of Ashbourne protected her, the more London would speak. William finally understood what she had tried to tell him. His power could open a prison door. It could not silence a city. So he made the decision he believed would protect her. He stayed away. He did not return to the square. He sent no letter and offered no explanation. He convinced himself that Eleanor would prefer his silence to another scandal. Yet each morning he passed the white rose resting in a glass beside his desk. It had begun to fade. Several days later, a black carriage stopped outside Eleanor's small flower shop. She saw the Ashbourne crest through the window and immediately stiffened. But William did not step out. Only his elderly butler descended carrying a carefully wrapped bouquet of white flowers. "There is no card," he said when she opened the door. Eleanor looked past him toward the darkened carriage. "Is His Grace inside?" "No, Miss Carter." "Then who sent these?" The butler's expression remained politely unreadable. "I was instructed to say only that they have been purchased at their proper value." He placed several coins on the counter, no more and no less than the bouquet was worth. Eleanor looked down at the white flowers. William had finally understood enough not to appear. But not enough to stop caring. After the carriage left, Eleanor stood alone in the quiet shop, her fingers resting against one pale petal. Then, for the first time since the rain-soaked afternoon in the square, she allowed herself to smile. The following week, another carriage stopped outside Eleanor's shop. This time, the butler did not bring flowers. He came to purchase them. He selected 24 roses, paid the exact price Eleanor requested, and left without mentioning William's name. The same thing happened the next week, and again the week after that. Sometimes the order was for roses to Brighton Ashbourne Hall. Sometimes it was for lilies to be delivered to a hospital or violets for a village church. Every purchase was paid fairly, without extra coins or favors Eleanor had not requested. William never appeared. Eleanor understood what he was doing. He had listened when she asked him to stay away, but he had not allowed the cruel rumors to destroy her livelihood. For several months, they spoke only through flowers. Eleanor arranged every order. William recognized her work by the careful ribbons and the single white bloom she always placed near the center. Whenever the flowers arrived, he would stop beside them longer than necessary, wondering whether the white flower was a greeting, a forgiveness, or merely part of the arrangement. He never asked. William believed silence was the safest kindness he could offer her. Then one cold morning, every bouquet purchased that week was returned to Ashbourne Hall. The flowers were still wrapped. The ribbons had not been untied, and the coins William had paid were placed inside a small envelope. There was no letter. William stared at the untouched bouquets in the entrance hall. "Why were these returned?" he asked. His butler lowered his eyes. "The shop was closed, Your Grace. A neighbor accepted the order yesterday, but someone brought everything back before dawn." William felt an uneasiness he could not explain. Within the hour, he was on his way to the square. Eleanor's shop stood behind locked shutters. The painted sign above the door had been removed, leaving only a pale mark against the brick wall. William knocked, though he already knew no one would answer. A woman from the neighboring stall recognized him. "She is gone, Your Grace." "Where?" "No one knows." William looked through the darkened window. Inside, the shelves were empty. "Why did she leave?" The woman's expression softened. "Her mother died 3 weeks ago." The words struck him with unexpected force. Eleanor had been caring for her mother through the winter. She had continued arranging flowers, filling his orders, and keeping the shop open while illness slowly emptied the rooms behind it. William had known none of this. He had believed staying away protected her. In truth, he had left her alone during the greatest sorrow of her life. She did not tell anyone where she was going, he asked. She sold what she could and left before sunrise. She said London had taken enough from her. The woman reached beneath her counter and brought out a small parcel. She left this for you. Inside was a brass key, a pressed white flower, and a folded letter. William recognized Eleanor's handwriting immediately. Your Grace, the key belongs to the garden behind our old home. My mother and I planted our first flowers there. There is nothing valuable inside, but I could not take the garden with me and I did not want it forgotten. Thank you for purchasing my flowers without trying to purchase my gratitude. You reminded me that kindness still exists, even when the world gives us reasons to doubt it. Please do not blame yourself for my leaving. I need to discover whether I can build a life that belongs entirely to me. Eleanor Carter. William read the letter twice. She had thanked him. That made the regret. He had opened a prison door for her, sent customers to her shop, and convinced himself that these actions were enough. Yet he had never asked about her mother. He had never asked whether Eleanor was frightened, lonely, or struggling to survive. He had decided what she needed, then disappeared before hearing the answer. That evening, William visited the garden behind Eleanor's abandoned home. Winter had left the ground bare, but a single white rose still clung to a neglected bush beside the wall. He placed Eleanor's key in his pocket. For the first time, William regretted remaining. Not because he had helped her, because he had left too soon. In the weeks that followed, he searched every market and railway record he could find. When London offered no answers, William sold an unused hunting estate and several valuable paintings from his private collection. Society assumed the Duke of Ashbourne had grown tired of England. They were wrong. William was leaving London because somewhere beyond the city was a woman who had taught him that kindness without understanding could still become abandonment. And this time, he intended to find her before silence separated them forever. A year after Eleanor disappeared, William arrived in a quiet town on the southern coast of England. He had followed rumors through villages, markets, and railway stations. Most led nowhere. Then a letter mentioned a young woman who had transformed an abandoned nursery into the finest flower garden in the county. Her name was Eleanor Carter. Beyond the final row of houses, William found a stone path leading toward the sea. At its end stood a wooden sign, Carter's Coastal Garden, flowers grown and sold with care. William stopped at the entrance. Roses climbed white trellises, lavender moved beneath the ocean breeze, and several women worked among the flower beds. 2 young apprentices carried pots toward a modest glasshouse. Then he saw Eleanor. She stood beside the shop, wrapping flowers for a customer. Her dress was simple but no longer worn thin by rain and cold. Confidence had replaced the tension William remembered from London. Here, no one ignored her. Everyone knew her name. William remained outside until the customer had gone. After searching for a year, he was suddenly unsure whether he had the right to enter. Eleanor looked up, her hands becoming still around the ribbon. Then she walked toward him. Your Grace. William removed his hat. Miss Carter. You came looking for me? Yes. He had rehearsed many explanations, but only the truth seemed worthy of being spoken. I owe you an apology. Eleanor waited. I believed staying away would protect you, William said. But I never asked what you needed. I made every decision for you while telling myself I was respecting your freedom. The sea wind moved through the flowers between them. When I learned about your mother, I understood how badly I had failed you. You were alone, and I had convinced myself that unseen kindness was enough. You did not know she was ill. I could have known. I should have asked. William did not reach for her or demand forgiveness. At last, Eleanor looked at him. I forgave you long ago. William had expected anger more easily than those words. Then why did you leave? Eleanor turned toward the garden. Because London had decided what I was. To some, I was a criminal. To others, I was a poor girl who had attracted a duke. Even those who pitied me stopped seeing my work. She touched a white rose beside the path. I wanted the next flowers I sold to be chosen, not pitied. William finally understood Eleanor had never rejected kindness. She had rejected the belief that kindness gave another person the right to define her. You built all of this, he asked. With help. A widow leased me the land after I showed her my plans. Several women repaired the glasshouse with me. I taught them what my mother taught me, and they taught me how to grow flowers by the sea. Her expression softened. I began with very little. But it was mine. William looked across the garden. Eleanor had created more than a business. She had given overlooked people a chance to build something of their own. You should be proud, he said. I am. So am I. William remained in the town, but he did not force himself into Eleanor's life. He rented a small house near the harbour and visited only when invited. Over the following months, their careful conversations became honest. William spoke of Ashbourne Hall's loneliness while Eleanor told him about her mother, the rumours, and the relief of beginning again. Neither pretended the pain had disappeared. They simply stopped allowing silence to speak for them. When a neglected field beside the garden came up for sale, William purchased it. Eleanor confronted him the next morning. "You promised not to interfere with my business." "I have no intention of interfering." "Then why buy the land?" William handed her a set of plans. The building drawn across the first page contained classrooms, workshops, and a greenhouse. "A school?" Eleanor asked. "For orphaned children and women who cannot afford training. Gardening, flower arranging, bookkeeping, and estate work. Skills they can use to build lives of their own." "And who will run it?" "You will, if you choose." "As your employee?" "As its director." "I will provide the land and the initial funding, but its work will be yours." This time, William had not decided what Eleanor needed. He had created a choice and waited for her answer. "I will do it," she said. The school opened the following spring. Children stood beside newly planted beds while women once refused employment wore green aprons with pride. Eleanor greeted every guest at the entrance as William watched from the garden path. When the crowd moved inside, he approached her holding a single white rose. Not a basket. Not an extravagant bouquet. One flower. "I believe this belongs to you," he said. Eleanor smiled. "The last time you bought my flowers, I returned your money. I remember. And the first time you sent me flowers, you were too afraid to sign your name. I remember that too." She accepted the rose and pinned it to her dress. "This one is not for sale." Then she reached for his hand. A year earlier, William had believed he needed to find Eleanor so he could rescue what had been lost. Now he understood that she had never needed rescuing. She had needed to be seen. Not as a poor flower seller beneath the rain, but as the intelligent, proud woman she had always been. Together, they entered the school. Behind them, the coastal garden stretched beneath the morning light, every flower blooming where it had been freely planted. And for the first time, William's kindness was no longer hidden. It was shared.